normal people become terrified of criminals.
Shots were just fired. Police just came out and told us, and we're headed there right now.
They become terrified of their own government.
This is from The Economist. 1 in 5 young Americans think the Holocaust is a myth. Our new poll makes alarming reading. So they released this poll, and you can see 18 to 29-year-olds, 20% believe the Holocaust is a myth. 30 to 44, it's just a little bit less than 10. 45 to 46, floating around 1. 65 plus, almost 0. The Holocaust has been exaggerated. Same stats, basically. Slightly more 18 to 29-year-olds, just over 21, maybe around 22 or 23%. And then about the same numbers for the other demographics. I find this fascinating in light of what we just saw with the universities. So this all makes sense.
And I love, by the way, that Elise Stefanik absolutely just eviscerated those
this is a tweet from her. She says, I was proud to co-lead the 2020 bipartisan Never Again Education Act to provide K through 12 federal grant funding for Holocaust education, and have been co-leading the bipartisan reauthorization this year. But these numbers from The Economist are absolutely appalling, chilling, and unacceptable. I'm not here to tell you what your opinions should be on any of this stuff, but I will. But my point is this: the universities ban pronouns.
Right.
They ban misgendering. They say fat phobia creates an unsafe environment. If you state facts that are offensive to the individuals, they will come after you. This is what we saw. The Free Press, as Barry Weiss's organization, put out this video. And then they defended and said, if you call for the genocide of Jews, well, now we got to talk about the Constitution.
Right.
You can see where their views align, and you can understand then why you're seeing these two things play a role.
Correct.
Why are young people so likely to believe the Holocaust is either a myth or exaggerated? Because these professors.
That's right.
Why are these professors willing to defend, under the guise of constitutionalism, the right of students to organize protests calling for the genocide of Jewish people? Because they hold these views themselves. They will ban speech that offends their power and then run and cry and hide behind the Constitution to defend the speech they like. The bigger picture here is universities, social media are subverting the young people in this country to make them oppose the worldview of the United States, our own histories, and thus, I mean, what you got to understand about this data right here, it doesn't change.
Yeah, but
18 to 29-year-olds in 10 years will just be in the 30 to 44-year bracket.
Right.
And so
your 65-year-olds drop off and the bracket just continues down.
So what we need is making sure we win this culture war.
Yes.
To shift things back in the direction of pro-America, believing history, things like that.
Well, and again, I've been arguing that one of our greatest threats as well is that culture, social, and religious warfare that we're seeing here at home. And that really starts with the indoctrination that's going on in our schools. I mean, it's also, as I was speaking yesterday at one of the gatherings, I explained the fact that, it's intentional that we've been removing civics from our schools because we don't want the younger generation to actually understand what their civic duties are, how to hold government accountable. And so all of this, in my opinion, is just this indoctrinated theory of how they're actually doing things to try and weaken the American values and essentially American exceptionalism and what we actually stand for as a nation.
Who's doing it?
I mean, these professors, these universities, these large donors, the George Soros of the world. I mean, this is all part of it. I mean, your huge endowments and who those actual alumni who are donating into that are actually, I mean, they would rather focus in on the things like ESG, CRT, and DEI, and meanwhile strip out one thing, which is GOD. And so that's what we have to start thinking about.
Well said. I think that some of these 18 to 29-year-olds might be trolling. I don't know how many of them were actually polled, but it sounds like something an 18 to 29-year-old might do is troll the internet and be like, yeah, I think it was fake. But okay, it is important to see World War II from the German perspective, for sure. It is. I was taught purely American perspective growing up. It's nice to see both sides, but I think I cannot dispute that these people were massacred, that the Jews were rounded up on trains and sent to concentration camps and starved to death.
Do you think it speaks to Gen Z's cynicism that they just don't really believe in anything anymore, including history in any way it was presented to them?
And the way Nick Fuentes has fun with it. He's like, yeah, whatever. He just says it because it gets a troll out of people.
It's not just that. It's
sorry, Nick.
When you have the Women's March, the organizer of the Women's March. You had Tablet Magazine release a story where they're espousing insane conspiracy theories about Jewish people. There's a meme, a joke about To figure out which political faction you are, simply insert whichever group you hate into the following sentences. And then it's like blank are responsible for all the world wars, blank control the corporations, blank do X. And it's just like you can choose the 1%, white privilege, Jewish people, the Chinese, the Russians. And then you figure out which
Octogenarians.
Yeah, it's basically just
kidding.
Who do you hate the most? And you found, So what's happening is you have in universities, these professors, we've seen this. That woman from UPenn doing the Kubrick stare, you know what that is? It's where you tilt your head down and look up and smirk. While she's being asked, is it against the rules to call for the genocide of Jews? She does the Kubrick stare, smiles and goes, in certain contexts. It's like, this is a person, these are universities that have said, you better not use the wrong pronoun or else.
Well, but it's interesting that as you pointed out earlier, and correctly so, you're talking about how it's, we don't want our students to feel, shamed. We don't want our students to feel at risk. But what about all of the Jewish students right now who are actually saying, I don't feel safe on my campus anymore. I don't feel safe on my universities. I have threats against me. And we now have people who are actually not just being, investigated, but have actually been arrested for making threats towards other Jewish students. I mean, what about their protection? What about their voice? What about their rights?
And I'll stress, I'll stress, I always give my free speech position is students should be allowed to protest as long as they're not harassing someone. So they're hiding behind the Constitution in a way that free speech advocates would agree with.
But my point is that
the rest
free
of their
speech is only
positions
working in one direction. And that's the issue that I have with universities. They want to say that it's okay for you to do one thing, but then if someone says something that's against your political view, you believe, then it's not okay.
Which exposes the hypocrisy.
Correct. That's
and
my
so
point.
The point I want to say right now, just to get it across with it, leftism is overlapping with Nazism to the greatest degree of any political ideology that exists. Not fascism, Nazism, explicitly. Fascism, you can make an argument about like what were they actually speaking to as a political ideology. Nazism was like, yes, plus they wanted to kill Jewish people. So when you add this into it, and you've got professors that are effectively, it was the late David Graeber. He hated this, but they called him the anarchist anthropologist. He said that elements of the left have adopted the fascistic moral framework of there is no truth but power. It's like, I agree with you there, David. And when you add into the fact that they hate Jews and don't believe in the Holocaust and want to defend the right to call for their genocide, I think now it's Nazism.
That's one of the things that set the Nazis aside as a fascist organization was their ethnocentrism. They were obsessed with white supremacy. So like seeing people talk poorly about a race in any way sets my alarm bells off.
And so which political faction in this country wants racial segregation again?
That's what I'm concerned with. If any of them want any form of it, it becomes very, very dangerous.
Let's go back in time. California was trying to amend their constitution to allow for segregation based on race in public contracting and education. This was back in like 2018. They lost. I was talking to a friend of mine who's a liberal, lefty, prominent Hollywood person. And, they had posted a comment in support of it. I had posted a comment saying like, this is shockingly offensive to someone who comes from a mixed race background that you would allow them to hold this against me. So she calls me and she's like, what do you mean? That's not, no, we're trying, what they wanted was affirmative action. We want universities to be able to help people who are underprivileged. And I was like, how many, what's the population demographics of California? And it's like, oh, it's like 70-something% white. And I was like, so your argument is that white people are privileged, are racist, inherently racist, use the systems of power for their benefit. And now you're arguing that white people should be allowed, the majority should be allowed to discriminate against anyone based on race in public contracting and education. And that fixes the problem?
It's such a hypocrisy. I mean, the way they handle themselves.
It's publicly hypocrisy, but when you understand what they want to do, you understand it's not hypocritical at all. It's exactly what they want. They want racial segregation. They want ethnocentrism, or identitarianism is probably a better way to put it. Or I think ethnocentrism is probably a fine way to put it too. They want race-based law. And when you add in the fact they hate Jews,
and
they're Nazis.
The Nazis specifically were like Aryans first. They were obsessed with propelling one species. I almost said race is such a silly term anyway. It's not even a scientific term. But then like the Jews and the Gypsies were like got the brunt of the hate. But it was everybody. If they weren't Aryan, like they were second class or less. And so it's either you're going to say this race is the best or we have to kneecap that race. Either one is leads to that totalitarian Nazism crap. And so I'm all about equality of opportunity, man. I understand some people's ancestors didn't have a lot of nutrition, maybe because they were born from slave camps, like 1860s. All these slaves let out of the South happen to be from one area of the world with a certain type of genetics, and so their kids don't have good education because they didn't have good education. They didn't have good nutrition because they didn't. So maybe their brains aren't getting what the nutrition they need to really have brilliance. That's real. That we got to address that too. But it's like in a free society where it's kind of up to you to make the best of it, and like you got to trust. Hopefully, you have good parents. It's you can't like legislate the solution. You can't throw money at it.
I do. I think that there needs to be change at home on the family level, right? All of these things we could say this is an issue, this is a problem, but ultimately, unless you have strong families, nothing else matters. And we see this replicated throughout American society, right? We are less engaged with community organizations. We attend church less regularly. We are stripped away of all the things that used to give us strong tenets of culture and, again, drive people back to their families. And that is ultimately something that needs more than a legislative change. It needs a psychological change in the homes of every American.
Well, and again, thinking of someone who, for example, if you look at my background, my mom and dad both had drug and substance abuse issues and were in and out of prison pretty much my entire life. My dad did almost 30 years in prison. My mom did almost 7.5 years in prison. And I kind of bounced house to house until I was finally adopted and taken in by my grandparents who and again, just a regular blue collar family. My grandfather was a welder. My grandmother was a stay-at-home mom who would do hair on the weekends. She had taken her classes through cosmetology school, so she'd do hair on the weekends after church and things like this. But, your socioeconomic status doesn't define who you are. I mean, that's the whole point of the greatness of America, if you will. And I think that's one of the things they're trying to water down and dilute. And I think a lot of people also have this issue of self-victimization where they just basically say, well, I can't do this because of my upbringing. Well, I wasn't born into money. I mean, we were thriving right above the poverty line. I mean, I can remember when my grandfather had a quadruple bypass, and he couldn't work any longer and he was disqualified even though he'd had 5 heart attacks from receiving any type of disability benefits. I mean, we lived for an entire year on around $6,800. I mean, there was a lot of rice, tomato gravy, cornbread, and, which now I absolutely crave when I go back home, but the whole point is that, there's this self-victimization that also is going on in our country that we have to break and understand that, we are a nation that believes in equal opportunity, not equal outcome. And that's the difference, in my opinion, between equity and equality and the difference between what the left and the right is trying to bring to the table.
Thanks for watching this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. Hang out with us live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. and become a member over at timcast.com for uncensored, members-only shows exclusive. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.